But I'd like to turn it over to Basil to introduce our speaker. Basil.
Thank you, President Barry. Past District Governor Ron Denham is one of our many valuable imports from England, where he received his BSc and a PhD in mechanical engineering. After immigrating to Canada, Ron obtained his MBA during his very exciting career in management consulting and higher education. When I joined Rotary in 1993, Ron was the current district governor of 707. When I first met him during his official visit to our club, my first and lasting impression was that Ron was a brilliant engineer, an extraordinarily knowledgeable Rotarian, and an amazing gentleman. During the following years, I met Ron and his late wife, Lynn, at every Rotary International Convention I've had the pleasure of attending, starting with the Glasgow Convention in 1997, where we shared a meal of haggis. Ron's passion for Rotary and for bringing clean water to all corners of our world has led to Rotary International Foundation honoring him with the Service Above Self Award and the Citation for Meritorious Service. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Rotary, Mr. Water, and a great friend.
Thank you very much, Basil. Fellow Rotarians, President Dave, Barry, great to be with you. I think I've unmuted myself. Can you all hear me reasonably well? Okay, coming through, good. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you about what is really the second largest program in Rotary. The first, of course, is polio eradication, which we all know about. But the program, the joint program between U.S. Agency for International Development, known as USAID, and Rotary is very, very little known, even though right now it is a $12 million program in 3 countries, and it's been going since 2007, 2008. But let me go back to the beginning. In the year 2004, the incoming president of Rotary was a guy called Glenn Estes. Some of you remember him, delightful guy from Tennessee or that part of the world. And I had got to know Glenn on a number of commissions. And that year he said, Ron, this is the centenary of Rotary. We should be doing something more in the humanitarian field. And he looked at me and said, Ron, he said, I would like you to be general coordinator of the program Water, Health and Hunger, a resource group as it was called. Well, as you know, in Rotary, you only have a chance to say no once, and that's when you're invited to join. So I said yes, and proceeded to promote water, health, and hunger. But after 1 year, it was obvious it was too big a portfolio. I said, Glenn, leave me with water, give somebody else health and hunger. So then, focusing on water, I began to attend international meetings on water and sanitation around the world. And the following year, there was the World Water Forum in Mexico City. And in those days, one of my, I had 2 missions. One was to help every Rotary club become aware of the opportunities and need in water and sanitation. But it was also to hustle outside organizations for funding for Rotary clubs. So anyway, down there, I met deliberately 2 key people from the U.S. Agency for International Development and suggested to them that there would be a natural partnership between our 2 organizations. They had money, we had talent. And they thought, hey, this is not a bad idea. So they went away and fulminated and thought about it. And a couple of years later, led to the signing of an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between U.S. Agency for International Development, and I'm going to refer to them as USAID for the rest of this course, and Rotary. signed by Ed Footer, who was the General Secretary of Rotary. And then shortly after that, we needed to sit down and he said, how were we going to implement this program? Well, because of my role in those days in what was now the Water and Sanitation Rotarian Action Group, I was invited to sit on a steering committee of 3 people from Rotary. One was Bill Boyd, the president of Rotary. There was also director Tom Thorfinson, and I was the, let's say, the guy who was doing the work in the field, but the lesser among equals. We sat down and gone through an interesting series of meetings. The question was, where do we work? How do we work together? And it had been agreed that in the first phase, we'd look at 3 different countries, and each country would have a budget between our 2 organizations of $2 million. $1 million would come from Rotary International, from the Rotary Foundation, $1 million from USAID. But then how do we get it together? This is a challenge. So what happened is that the USAID gave us a list of their focal countries in order of priority. We in Rotary didn't have anything like those priorities, but we looked through various parts of the developing world and identified districts, particularly districts, where there was a strong capacity in Rotary and an interest in water. So after a number of meetings, we jointly agreed that the first phase of the program would embrace the Dominican Republic, Ghana in Africa, and the Philippines. And we're off and running. The idea behind this program is that Rotary and USAID were going to explore ways of working together to see if 2 + 2 could equal 5. What was the synergy? How could we leverage each other? So we then started, we visited with the Rotarians in the Dominican Republic, and they already had a very strong program going, building the biosand filter and delivering it to many of the villages. So naturally, when we were talking to the USAID, we said, look, there's already a strong program there on biosand filters. Let's see if we can build on that. And they said, yes, they would. However, it didn't quite work out as jointly as we'd hoped. Instead of 2 organizations coming together jointly, we both went down our separate paths. Rotary working on biosand filters of the Rotary clubs, USAID working on some of their initiatives. Sorry, excuse me, I just turned off my cell phone. Working on their initiatives. Nevertheless, we learned a lot how to work together. We learned a lot from how not to work together. And so those ideas were then transferred into the Ghana initiative. And because I had worked professionally in Ghana a number of years before, I was the liaison person between Ghana and the Rotary Foundation. There they had a very powerful host committee. They had 3 past district governors and the past director of Rotary, Sam Okadetsu. The 3 past district governors, of those, 2 were professional engineers. 1 has run his own civil engineering company. So clearly that steering committee got off to a great start. And they did sit down with USAID. And incidentally, USAID don't implement projects directly. They work through implementing agency. And in Ghana, it was an organization called Relief International. The 2 did come together, but not quite as well as we would like. The Rotarians, doing what they always seem to do, focused on infrastructure, digging wells, putting in boreholes, building toilets. We had hoped that they would have got more into the software, capacity building, training, things of that nature. But that was left very largely to the US aid. But nevertheless, the Rotarians and the US aid team working together. They'd come to a community. They would agree that the Rotarians would build their infrastructure first, and the US aid people would do the software, working together. So that was a success. The 3rd country in this first phase was the Philippines. This was a challenge. The challenge there is the Philippines comprises five or six different districts. And they couldn't agree on which districts should receive this funding. We got off to a very bad start, a lot of jealousy. Eventually, of the 5 districts, 4 were selected to work, and they worked on various projects, some on water, quite a few on sanitation, because water wasn't the big issue there. There's lots of water in the Philippines, but sanitation and hygiene were big issues. So they proceeded to go ahead. In any event, this initial phase was completed after 3.5 years, and we sat back and reflected. We met with the USAID again, and they were very pleased. They were more pleased with the experience than we were. I felt, quite frankly, that we'd let them down, and I'd expected more. But they said, no, we've learned a lot. So we said, okay, let's do it again. So we then embarked on the second phase. And for the second phase, the budget was doubled. It was now $12 million in total. Of that 12 million, of that 12 million split 3 ways. 4 million was to go to each of 3 selected countries. Of that 4 million, 2 million was coming from Rotary, 2 million from the U.S. Agency for International Development. But the 2 million from Rotary was partly a match. 1.8 million would come from the Rotary Foundation. 200,000 had to come from Rotary clubs. So we agreed early on that was viable. We'd go ahead on that basis. And so we started the work. Once again, choosing the countries. Again, we went through the same process as the first time, but this time we did have some experience. We knew that it hadn't worked very well in the Dominican Republic. We knew that in Ghana it had worked reasonably well. We knew in the Philippines it hadn't worked well. So based on this initial discussion, we said, okay, we will go ahead in Ghana. We will build on the initial program. And then the second country, let's try Uganda. And then the third country, we said, okay, let's make it Madagascar. Now it's interesting, all 3 of those countries were in Africa. And part of the reason for that is the need was and still is greatest in sub-Saharan Africa. The program in Ghana got off to a very good start. The U.S. agency has subcontracted with an organization called Global Communities to implement their phase. And we in Rotary, of course, do the work we usually do. Your Rotary clubs contracting in many cases with local borehole drillers, well diggers, builders of toilets, and so forth. And the program proceeded to get off to a very, very good start. In Uganda, it was off to a slow start. And in Madagascar, which is a lovely country, by the way, if ever you want an interesting experience, but in Uganda, USAID lost their chief of mission. They have a temporary person, but that person is not familiar with water, sanitation, and hygiene, so they haven't been able to start. Our Rotarians in Madagascar were all fired up, raring to go, but because nothing has happened, and as you know, through the usual Rotary one-year-itis, all those people have now moved on. There's a new team there on the Rotary side, and quite frankly, it's static. We're having a meeting in the near future to decide whether or not it should be Madagascar or whether we'll go somewhere else. And I think there's a high probability we might choose Nepal as the third country instead of Madagascar. But anyway, we got underway well. The Rotary team met regularly, or does meet regularly still, with Global Communities and USAID. They identified 6 regions in Ghana. Those of you familiar with the country, the regions are the central region, the eastern region, the Volta region, the western region, Takori Sakarando, and the northern region, Tamale. In all of those areas, the Rotary Club is strong, and they were committed to this program. they sat down and planned and identified about 120 communities. In the majority of those countries, the Rotarians agreed to do the infrastructure, putting in boreholes, digging toilets, but they also agreed to do some of the software, community mobilization, advocacy at the community level too, and similarly, global communities did the opposite, where we were doing the hardware, the infrastructure, they would do the software, and vice versa. And that program has gone really well. But a year and a half ago, at one of the meetings of the steering committee, I said, look, we are concerned about sustainability. We should all be concerned about sustainability. Let's look back at the first phase in Ghana and see how sustainable some of those projects were and what can we learn from it. So we retained a professional organization based in England. The organization is called Aqua Consult. The director, a guy called Harold Lockwood, and they went into the area in Ghana of the original projects. And they surveyed a number of communities where there had been wells, where there had been toilets and so forth, and came back with an interesting report. And there were some surprises. They looked particularly at communities where Rotarians had developed the infrastructure, wells and boreholes. Some of the wells had been mechanized, submersible pumps driven by solar power, pumping water into a water tower. Others were hand pumps. Now, my experience is the hand pump is a very reliable device, particularly the Aphrodite. It'll last 20 years with minimal maintenance. But we found that in Africa, the hand pumps were not sustainable. They weren't functioning any longer. But the mechanized units, electrically driven pumps, were still operating. Well, what was the reason? The reason was simple. It goes back and it reflects how important understanding the culture is in the country. In those parts of the world, there's a great belief in God. If you get water, it's God doing. If you have a drought, it's God doing. If you get sick, it's God doing. If you get well, it's God's doing. But the feeling was there that the water, the lack of water or the presence of water was due to God. So the people said, look, God's providing the water. Why should we have to pay for that water when we're doing all the work manually in a hand pump? So they refused to pay for the water. This meant that the host community didn't have funding to pay technicians to fix the pumps when they failed. The net result is, in 3 of the communities, those pumps weren't working. On the other hand, where the pumps were electrically driven, they could clearly see that God needed some help. They'd had to put in pumps, solar power. It was pumping the water, providing it. The people didn't have to do any pumping themselves. Aha! So therefore, they were quite willing to pay for the water, put it into the local treasury, and when anything needed fixing, if the gland needed fixing, electric motor needed replacing, what have you, there was funding available. So this then fed back into the second phase, the larger phase in Ghana, and in the tail end of that program, we've switched from hand pumps to electrical pumps, even though the electrically driven pump is more expensive than the hand pump. If it's going to be sustainable, and if the community is prepared to pay to maintain it, we said that is the better investment. So that brings you up to date from the technical point of view. Now, of course, as you know, in the district, we've reached out and asked for some funding help for this particular project, and I'm just delighted and thank you and all the other clubs for pitching in. It became a complex set of issues. Goes back to that division between Rotary Foundation and Rotary clubs. The Rotary clubs in Ghana raised $50,000. Now, when you think of the quality of life and average income in that country, that was a very significant contribution. It actually came from their DDF, because you know DDF comes from them. They'd also raised money at the club level. We'd got $10,000 from a Rotary club in Michigan, and in total, we'd raised about $138,000. But Rotary clubs had to come up with $200,000 in order to get the full $1.8 million. And that's where we stuck. Now, fortunately, I say fortunately because when the COVID virus came, everything has to stop. If it hadn't come, the project might have been terminated because we didn't have funds. Well, now, as a result of the efforts in our district here, 7070, Malcolm Bell and Devon Biddle in the Oshawa Parkwood Club, who made a substantial donation from his family foundation, we now have the money. That is going to Ghana, and it will release the balance of the money from the Rotary Foundation, so this program will now be completed successfully. So that summarizes where we are on the second largest program in Rotary's history after polio eradication. Now I look at my watch and see I've talked long enough, but so I think it's your chance now to shoot questions at me, and as you know, I love to go on talking for a long time, but I don't want to do that. I want to answer your questions rather than tell you what I'd like you to hear. So thank you very much, Basil. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me. But as I say, I'm here to help you understand. And once again, thank you and all the other clubs and Rotarians in this district for their support at the last minute.
Thanks, Ron. And if anybody has any questions, let's do some questions before we formally thank Ron. Just raise your hands, virtually or otherwise. Frank from Trinidad.
Yeah.
Hi, Frank Luxley from Rotary Spain West. Great presentation there, Ron. It seems that your projects focus more on the supply of water rather than the quality of the water and filtration systems. Can you speak a little bit about that? Is there another part of it that we're not seeing?
Yeah. First of all, the water in nearly all cases was coming from deep aquifers, 80, 100 meters deep. The water quality is good, but nevertheless, they do chlorinate it at the point of use. There are no solids, no microorganisms, so there is no real need to filter it in this particular case. So, and that is generally the case in sub-Saharan Africa. If you go deep into the aquifer, the quality is good. There are some exceptions. In Kenya, my own club was involved in a project there, and there was a heavy concentration of fluoride in the water. We didn't have an effective treatment or mitigation for fluoride, so there we switched to rainwater harvesting. Once again, the rain is good, but the roofs can get dirty, so we there chlorinated the water too. But in Ghana, small chlorination was sufficient to have very high quality water.
Okay, if I can have a follow-up.
Yeah.
So the common denominator of all those countries that you helped was that the government in that area, in those countries, were not doing enough or could not do enough to give supplies to the villages and to the rural areas and so on. What happens if a country, say, I'm just saying, like Trinidad, which has infrastructure in place, a large government apparatus that is not operating properly? How would your project help a country like, say, Trinidad?
Well, if you already have the facilities, you already have the pumps and boreholes and so forth, but they're not working properly?
Well, we are not much more. We are not very much into wells. We are more reservoirs and dams.
Surface water. Surface water.
Yeah, surface water.
Yeah.
That's our main.
Yeah. Okay. So there, if you've got surface water, I would certainly need to look at the filtration. Maybe, in fact, we have a situation like that in Ghana by the Volta River Dam, where they're taking surface water, filtering it, purifying it, storing it, and then selling it to wholesalers who come and fill their jerry cans, maybe 20,
Okay.
then drive up and deliver it. So in Trinidad, what is the issue? Do we need to emphasize more filtration? What is the issue? You have water.
Is distribution.
Okay.
There's two things. The catchment of the water in the reservoirs is not efficient.
Yeah.
A lot of that water goes, bypasses the reservoirs and floods and goes back into the sea without us catching it.
Right.
And then the actual distribution of that water to the population is full of leaks and infrastructural issues and so on.
Okay, well, first of all, if the water is running away, we should stop it. One of the things we've done in India is to recontour some of the hillsides so that the water flows into a dam. In other cases, we'll put in gully plugs and check dams. So the saying is, if the water is running swiftly, slow it down. If it's moving slowly, stop it. And we've got a large number of ponds, so we collect the water. Once the water is collected, however, we still then have to be concerned with the quality. We'll filter it, maybe pump it into a storage tank, and then from there, allow people to distribute it. In fact, encourage it. One of the things we like to do is to encourage social entrepreneurs. And if there's water available, let's fund some people. Let's give them some startup capital. Let's lend them, a microloan to put them in business, give them the equipment, so that then they can generate money from distributing the water and gradually repay the loan. That's what I would like to see in that circumstance. It would be a natural.
Yeah, I think in Trinidad as well, it'll be nice to get help to the rural communities that are not well fed by our government, and let them have their own self-starting well supplies and so on. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, Frank, put together a global Rotary project. Work with one of the Rotary clubs, identify this kind of need, outline the project, and send it to us in Wasrad. We'll look for it, look at it, qualify it, and then work with you to get a global grant or district grant or something like that to help the project proceed.
Yes, it seems like a good project to pursue.
Yeah. And of course, being a member or tied in with this particular Rotary Club right here in front of us, I'm sure they would be willing to be the lead international partner for you.
Very nice. Yep, I'm sure we'll explore that.
Yeah, good.
Thanks,
Thank
Frank
you.
and Ron. And anybody else has any questions for Ron? Basil.
Yeah.
This is actually for Frank. Frank, about 60 years ago in Trinidad, there was a company, I believe it was called Lock Joint, that came in and put down a lot of pipes for your water system. I think Trinidad needs an infrastructure renewal, and perhaps that's where we need to get Rotary involved.
Well, in that, I would think that is a huge project, and I'm not sure if Rotary is the right organization I can't even imagine the billions it will take to redo the distribution infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago. We have lots of leakages. I think it was quoted at over 60% leakage, and so that water is not even getting to the residents. So maybe the Rotary can help in advice and so on to the government and so on. I'm not sure about the funding of those huge projects. Those are massive projects, I think, to affect infrastructure, unless we're looking at it on a community level.
Well, I was just going to say, can you look at the local level, Frank? Not the whole thing at once. Choose an area, choose a community where Rotary is strong and can work with the community and put together a program there. And that could then become a model for other communities in the country, and the government might then sweeten the pot and do some more work once they see it can be done.
Yeah, I agree with the community approach because it's really, if you're able to provide a proper supply of water, it relieves a lot of stress in that community.
Oh, sure.
And they're able to expand their life in other ways without worrying about carrying water cans for 3 hours, 4 hours a day from a river to where they're living and so on.
Yeah.
Frank, that's what you all did with Parliament.
Then
build the infrastructure to take it up the hill. And
That's
where
right,
the village core or community core idea started.
That's right, yeah. Our community for Parliament, we are continuing to work with them to try to upgrade that facility that we built for them. years ago and so on. And we're very proud of that community. But that's exactly, David is right, that's exactly how we do. You do it by communities. And there are a lot of them suffering on Trinidad and Tobago that would be appreciative of that kind of help.
Okay, any other?
I think what happened there was that the water authority came in, provided some of the engineering expertise, but the actual community provided the sweat equity.
Yeah,
That's right. They work on that. That's
That was the effective way, right?
And they gain ownership of it by doing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of their community.
Yeah.
Allows some cooperation as well. They do that as well, where the community gets involved in building the infrastructure, and then they take ownership of it in the same way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Any other questions for Ron? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Al Meredith to thank Ron, and then I'll unmute everybody for applause.
Thanks, President Barry, and thanks again, Ron. It's been a long time since I last saw you, and I know that this water project, which you have headed up now for, I think what you said, 14 years or more, has always been a big passion of yours. Anything you've ever done in Rotary has been very passionate.
Yeah.
And so it was great when you were my district governor. We had a lot of fun, and I know that we as a club have been involved in a number of wells we've drilled in Africa, and certainly been supporting Steve Rutledge.
Yes.
His efforts in Laos for, I think it could be 6 years or more now. I've lost track of time, but I've always found that to be a very, very good project that we've always liked to help Steve out with. So this comes under your jurisdiction, I would assume, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And it's great to see you again, Ron, and thanks for filling everybody in on what Rotary and yourself have been up to. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you all.